Friends, welcome to another edition of the Landscape and Garden Show with Bob Harvey and yours truly, BT Brian Turner, the show that's still fishing for a new and more official name.
It doesn't keep us from doing what we do so well, though.
No, we bring it forward each and every week here on the Alive and Social Network, no matter what. And we're joined by a special guest today, the one, the only from Care 11's Grow with Care, Bobby Jensen. Hello, Bobby.
Hey,
Welcome.
Guys. Good, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Anytime there's room for another guy with the name Bob.
We like Bob's.
Yes.
So clearly defined, Bob Harvey, Bobby
That's
Jensen.
Yes.
Bob Harvey, Bobby Jensen. Although I've known Bobby Jensen for so many years, I often call him Bob, so I'm actually doing this more for my benefit than anybody else's.
Well, the hand gestures you're doing there will certainly
does.
help. Did you ever work at an airport?
I thought the same thing.
Yeah,
but he
indeed.
was landing
Yeah,
us.
yeah.
I could taxi in a 737
Right.
without any problem right there. Podcast listeners, just imagine my hands doing it without the batons on the end of it all right there. Having you here, it just seems, and Bob Harvey, I think you'll agree, we could go like a zillion different directions on the podcast program here, and it's kind of difficult to know where to start.
Well, that's what people feel like doing because it's spring. You
Yeah.
can feel
There's
kind
zillion
of the
different
buzz
directions.
in the air
Yeah.
and the craziness
Oh, my
and the
God.
excitement.
It feels just
exciting.
fantastic out there.
And it's close. I mean, there are still some things not to do. I don't think I'd plant a tomato yet, but or any of the soft crops,
None of
tomato,
the
basil.
tropicals, none of that soft stuff.
No, it's just May. It just started. I mean, you need to warm up a little bit more.
If you've started seeds and they're on your windowsill or something like that, keep them inside. Don't even start hardening them off yet. I don't.
I mean, yeah, okay. Well, this week's going to be really nice, but
Yeah.
there's a good possibility of a frost or a good
Yeah.
couple of cold nights. It's
Yeah, we don't want to risk that.
no, and that's what I think people forget all the time, Bob. I think they're just, they get excited, they want to put it out, they want to, especially the tomatoes. Why do you want to babysit this thing? Why do you want to go out there and cover it? Tomatoes don't grow till the ground warms up, so why not just wait? I don't plant anything like that until the first week of June. And mine will mine will beat yours down the line because it's going to grow when it grows.
Yeah.
What kind of garden does Bobby Jensen grow? I mean, I think now that you've
Lots
brought up
of other people's gardens.
Yeah.
No, I do have I have a garden alongside my house, mostly vegetables, all vegetables.
Southern exposure there.
yes,
Mhm.
and it's for me and my grandson. So I'll give you my proud papa moment. This is the best thing I've ever done. When my grandson, who's 9 years old, we lived with us for about 4 years. When he comes to our house now, he goes to the garden, then he comes in and he tells me what I did wrong.
Oh, that's great.
Poppy, you didn't pick the tomatoes. There's tomatoes to be picked. Poppy, you got weeds. So he really goes there first. And that's like one of the proudest things I've done because, we take a kid hunting, we take a kid fishing, take a kid gardening, man. We need that crop of young generation, I'm sure, Bob, when you go speak to people, you go to garden clubs, they're maturing. They're getting beyond mature now. And there's nothing coming up behind. And I think, guys in the industry, I think that's part of our job, to get it out there and get people to understand there's nothing better feeling in the world than to play in a garden.
No, and our culture has not allowed for much of that to happen the last generation or so. And it's a missed opportunity for a lot of experience of how our living environment affects our life and the choices that we make and how we spend our time. And you're a perfect example with your grandson. Those are memories that are made,
Well said.
that are carry decades later. And then when those people decide that they want to do a landscape design, I experience this when we meet with people. The couple we met with today, so much of the design will be driven by sentiment, memories, particular plants. Maybe the grandmother said, here,
Smells.
put this in, take this home and put it in your garden. Or we have to preserve those forget-me-nots over there. They came from my mother, my mother's garden. And so there's sentiment attached to that, and that initiates and kind of incentivizes us to do something by recreating those memories. You're creating memories. You're creating really good stewardship in the environment and the landscape and a better understanding. I have 5 sons. they experience it. Sometimes they're not interested, but they don't have a choice.
He's only 9. Remember that.
Yeah,
I'm
and I have a
sure-
10-year-old
I'm
who's
sure
like, Dad,
I'm
I'm
good."
working for you
Right,
this summer.
right.
You know, so I'm excited
Right.
about that
That's
because
great.
their eyes are wide with wonder, and it has to speak to them. There are children's gardens. There are things in the gardens and in all the different selections of plants that create their own experiences, their sensory experiences with the touch, the texture. Sometimes it's sound, you know. If you and taste, honeysuckle is a perfect experience.
Or like Bobby was
example.
saying with the tomatoes, growing tomatoes.
Exactly.
I mean, actually,
That's an obvious one.
Well,
Obvious.
it's obvious because, all right, look where it comes from. It doesn't come from a store. It doesn't come from Cub Foods. It comes from here. And, like you said, eating it in the backyard, grabbing one off of the vine. There's nothing like it. There's truly nothing like it.
There's other examples of that happening in our culture as well, and I think we're seeing it with golf courses, and that's similar to what we're talking about with gardening here. In that you're in the outdoors, you're embracing what you're doing on that beautiful carpeted lawn, or in my case, mostly amongst the trees. But all that being said, there's the same falling out and falling of numbers happening in the golfing world, similar to gardening. So you got to get those kids out.
We got to
there
get them out.
swinging the
get 'em out
clubs,
of the
or
house.
yeah,
Get 'em out of the house.
getting them putting that spade in the ground and having some fun.
It's getting them back to nature. Just take a walk in the woods.
Indeed.
It gets their mind working, and then they start to make and draw the correlations and the relationships between how we benefit, how it gets from seed to feed, if you will, when they're eating it at the table, and how you back that up, all the different layers that goes through. And it's there's an appreciation that's gained and an understanding, and things get done. Things get done. Things produce better. There's just a better sense of gratification.
Work
and
ethic.
Work ethic, which is really
You got to weed, man.
we
You
came
gotta-
from an agricultural. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
we
It's
still
just Minnesota.
We still are. I mean, we rely on everything that starts with the ground.
Well, you bring up a good example of things getting done. Just seeing the completion of the circle. From planting to tending and then harvesting and then making things ready for what'll be the next season. You see that full completion, and those lessons that you carry those forward into other parts of your life as well.
It's ritualistic, and the things that you do in the garden, the landscape, reinforce those rituals, and people look forward to that. Whether it's an apple fest or a raspberry festival or a tomato fest, or those are the kinds of things that bring people together, and it's a ritual.
It's very communal.
Yeah.
It's very communal.
And it gets people talking. You talk about the neighborhoods that have the most going on with community gardens and people that get out, and it's such a wonderful, very non-political way to get everybody talking to each other.
Yeah.
And I learned that through my career, where I started working in some of the business nodes and said, let's put containers out here. Well, will it affect my business? Yeah, I think so. You're in a retail business.
Positively,
And
right.
so the people would say, some of my earliest clients back in the 80s would say, every person that came in today commented on our window boxes.
Right.
So
Well-
they commented, number one, and number two, they came in.
Or as,
And
you mentioned, I think a couple of weeks ago, I think we were talking about the Bibelo.
Yes.
And how people were pulling over because of seeing
Yes.
the containers and because of seeing the window boxes and coming in the store and saying, the reason I'm in the store is because I
that
saw
was
it.
just the one I was citing
Yeah.
in my mind too. So yeah, it's a communication tool, and in that people have more of a sense of belonging and accommodating, and
It's a
it
common
generates
thread.
Yeah,
It's
it
a
is.
common thread that we all can enjoy, that we all can understand.
And we can empathize too. If everything dies from something or other, or a storm comes through, then everybody feels the same way.
It's a shared grief. Yeah.
Not good, but
Hey, Bobby and Bob, we are going to move into Arbor Day Revisited because on the end of last week's show, we kind of rushed through a few things, I think, because we were at the end of the program. But before we get there, Bobby, I want you to finish up. What else is in your garden? What else will you and your grandson have in the garden? So some tomatoes.
basil, of
Basil,
course.
yep,
Some
yep.
peppers. I'm going to expand it. I'm putting another raised bed in this year, and I think I'm going to, something that's always on my mind. There are really 3 seasons of gardening. You know, there's the early crops that should have been planted already that, you know, that you can put in soon as the ground dries out and put them in. And, you know, anybody that's ever had lettuce and planted it, see, everybody goes on Mother's Day and buys their plants. So you put lettuce in on Mother's Day, and then by the middle of June, it starts to bolt and it tastes terrible. You plant seed in late July, August, and it grows into the cold. And it gets sweeter and nice. I picked kale last year until the snows stopped me from picking kale. So there is 3 seasons. I think people really, the bad part is you're never going to find the plants because there's just not enough people doing it. So the growers aren't going to grow crops that no one buys.
Sure.
But to plant seeds or start a second crop of all the cold crops that you could have planted earlier, I think people have to start to realize you plant early, you plant the stuff that grows in the heat, and then you plant the stuff that grows early
in the cool
again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, it extends the whole deal. It gives you a longer instead of everything being ready in the middle of the summer, which is, you know, okay. But as you see gardens, no doubt, Bob, where people buy on Mother's Day in May and June, their gardens look
It's
great.
all yeah.
And then it
It's all
dies
big
all.
and
Then it's just
blossoming.
green the rest of the year.
Yeah.
You know, so and I've seen your work and I know your work. That's what you need. You need to take them through the seasons. You need to take the color palette to change and to grow with the season. You know, everything, like, except if you're doing annuals. But you know, there's a lot more than annuals out there now.
Yeah.
And even with the annuals, there's a selection process for early, mid, and late. You know, the cool weather annuals
Right.
that are going in as we speak, and then the hotter, more heat tolerant annuals for summer would be xeriscape or tropical, humid, and then the fall crop of things that in our design we incorporate a lot of the edibles in the brassica family and the lettuces, and it's just delightful and it's sweet. Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right. I like curly parsley is a great filler.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful.
That's
Dark
going in.
green.
Yep.
Cool looking plant. There's so many things you can do now.
And let's remind our podcast listeners that you can see some of Bob Harvey's work at edelweissdesigns.com. Take a peek at the website, and you'll be amazed at the pictures. You see some fine work indeed there, Bob
Great work.
Harvey.
Beautiful work.
Thank you.
Very
It's-
nice
it's
indeed.
enjoyable.
And did you hear the way he talked about? He listened to, you know, there are designers that want to tell people what to do, and then there's designers that listen to what the person's needs are. And I don't get it because that's the easiest sell in the world when you listen and this is what they want. I want my grandmom's plant. I want this to, it just reminds me of that. You know, you satisfy those needs. It's just a better project for you and it works for them. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's really a gift. I think.
Well, thank you. You know, I've been in it long enough to learn by trial and error that's why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. So, you know, you listen and you listen well, and then you assess the data and you say, how can you take, it's a wonderful challenge.
That's
it's
your
a sense
job
of
then,
adventure.
right.
That's what real design is. Real design is not just, you know, popping out a cookie cutter. Well, because I like these plants and I know these are sun and these are shade, and we use only this kind of stone for patio and this kind of lighting. That these are the things that we're going to push.
Yeah.
You know, and that really disenfranchises the whole experience in
Yeah.
the profession. So you learn a ton from the clientele that keeps your profession fresh and keeps it pushing you to, you know, stretch your limits and investigate things you may not know as much about, but they're interested in and saying, you know, what about this? What about that? So
And what their life
Don't
is
we
like.
always learn wherever we go in
It's
this
relational.
industry? You always learn something.
Yeah.
it's relational with our clients. I mean, we have clients that span 24 years. And to me, through that long building that relationship over time, you get to know so much more so that your margin of error really shrinks. Because
You would know what to expect. They know
what to
Yep.
expect, and you know how to supply and meet the needs and the demands.
Arbor Day revisited. So here we are, past Arbor Day in 2015, but it's still tree planting. Always.
We have a good chunk of time, and depending on the type of trees that you plant, that's another window that we have. If we talk mainly deciduous trees right now, you can see the city, the park board's going around planting all the different kinds of trees and stuff. And we talked a little bit last week about bare root planting
Yes, we did.
versus container planting versus balled and burlap planting, and what are the things to look for in that process. The biggest, most common mistake that occurs, and I'm sure Bobby will agree on this, is that people tend to plant things too deep.
It's the killer.
And it'd be like putting you in the swimming pool and just holding your head underwater and saying, oh, you don't need any oxygen. That's fine. You'll just get it through the water. You'll be fine. There's some in there. The same thing with the plants. They need to be at the right elevation, at the level
Mistake
of ground.
number one right there.
Right.
Oh,
And
huge mistake.
it's a huge mistake. And also based on the type of soil, and we talk about getting to know your soil so that you know the proper planting technique for that specific plant. It could be plants. If we categorized all these trees into the categories of soil type, for instance, what are the trees that tolerate heavy clay soil? Anybody live in Medina out there? I mean, we're
Lots
talking
of clay.
Yeah, it's almost blue. And so what are the things that are going to survive that? You're not going to get a sugar maple or a red rhubarb maple in a heavy clay soil and then plant it an inch or two too deep, unless you want to see it die by Halloween, and then it'll look great for Halloween decor. But if you go to areas like our city soil, for the most part, is pretty uniform within the city limits. You have decent drainage. You do some appropriate amendments, mostly, hopefully organic, with the compost and organic leaf matter with high mycorrhizal content. Your options are much more broad here. So based on your space and site conditions, as we call it, so how much light, what's the exposure to the wind, what's the purpose of planting the tree? Do you want afternoon shade, or do you want fall color or a flowering experience?
Energy savings. What's the reason?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the kinds of things you take into account. And obviously everybody that's listening out there would have a different situation to address.
And the thing is, I think people are afraid to ask that question. People don't ask questions, what goes on with this plant? That should be the first question you ask, because what and why am I planting this plant here? What's the problems? What's the issues?
Well, or maybe the issue is not asking the questions of yourself, as Bob Harvey was saying here. What do I want to accomplish with this tree or with this plant? So you've got to answer those questions yourself. If you're looking for this and the shade and then this and energy savings or whatever the case may be, the flowering, then you go to a category of plants that'll satisfy that, and then you'll find more about what those are and what they do.
I think it's one of the most important things out there, the information. People think it's a lot harder than it is. It's not. It's not secrets. They're out there. You can find out what to put. Like you said, I have clay soil. Well, go online. Call someone. Go the extension service. What grows in clay soil? You'll have a lot more success.
Mm-hmm. Like one off the top of my head that's very underplanted, that can handle just about any soil condition, is catalpa. The northern catalpa species, which I have planted that thing in, the heaviest clay, and seen it just absolutely
flourish. I love those big leaves too.
Right.
That's just a great
that
tree.
tropical element. We're talking about texture and design and scale.
Mm-hmm.
There's a beautiful old hobby farm out in Medina where we planted one next to an old barn where the paint is kind of rustic, the red is faded and it's peeling a little. And then when that catalpa opens, those beautiful big white panicle flowers, and they're fragrant. It's a picture. We've taken many photographs. It's just absolutely stunning. And they're a moderate size grower. If you can speed up their growth a little bit with some extra care. But
trees don't grow
really
fast
low.
enough for human beings.
No.
just get over it, guys. It doesn't. Your
That's a good
speed
point.
and their speed are two different deals. What's a fast-growing tree? It's still not a fast-growing tree.
It's still not fast enough.
Right. It's never. Buy a bigger tree.
We've been talking about soil in the midst of talking about trees. And Bobby Jensen, I know that this whole idea of soil strength is really important to you, and it's something that you've been studying more and really working on more and more in your world.
Well, over the years, from using chemical fertilizers or whatever we've been using, it adds salts to the soil, which then kill off the bacteria, kills off the microbes, earthworms. So it's we were talking about cycles, BT. It's the same thing. You're in a cycle. Why do you think farmers are pumping nitrogen into the ground? Because without it, it doesn't grow.
Sure.
So we've put ourselves in these cycles where without doing this, I'm not going to get any results. So what you have to do is break that chain. You have to add organic material. Everybody should be able, most places you can find compost, black gold. I mean, if you can find compost, mix it into everything. Everything you got, get it in there. Get those nutrients back in. It absorbs water. It releases water. There's just so many benefits to getting the soil back. They don't really need us. We don't have to feed them. I mean, what's sustainability? Putting the right plant in the right place that's going to grow to the right size and shape without the addition of lots of fertilizers, chemicals, and watering. If you do that, it makes your job so much. That's why you have success. You plant the right plant. Do you want to plant a tree that you got to whack back to get in your house? A shrub that's in front of your house? And let's be realistic. I've been doing this a long time. For some silly reason, we thought that you would put a pointy thing, 3 round things, another pointy thing, the door, and then repeat it. But wait a minute, even the best part, we thought that'd grow in 3 feet. So for the rest of the 20 years that you live there, you whack it back.
You keep
so
cutting
you
it
can
back.
get into your, now, all plants like you do, they're deeper. They have depth. The plant grows to the right size. Guys and gals, maybe it's not going to look finished, but I tell you what, in 5 years, it's going to look great and alive compared to jamming in a whole lot of plants and say, hey, look at that, I got a lot of plants. Yeah, and dead plants in 5 years.
And they're all crowding each other out.
They're all crowding each other, and you don't get to see the beauty. You don't get to see the shape. You don't let it grow to its natural shape. So, all of those things come together, and I think the soil is one of the most important things. Like, I don't know, Bob, 10, 20 years ago, what did we tell people? Dig a big hole, take 50% of the soil out. You mix it with peat moss and put it back in. And now we're more like, indigenous soils, add a little organic material to it. You don't have to dig it twice as deep. You don't have to dig it twice as wide. Loosen up the soil. You don't want to make a little perfect little area of beautiful soil because the roots aren't going to go anywhere but there. Why would they?
What happens when they just stay in that location too?
Right.
That presents its own problems, and we talk about that with some of the tree planting. If you plant a balled and burlap tree that's maybe been balled and burlap for an extended period of time,
Roots are wound around.
They're going around and around and around, and then eventually 5, 10, 15 years later, the tree just goes belly up. And that's because it basically strangled itself.
Well, we talked about that with my river birch in my landscape, where on 2 sides I've got the reservoir for the pond, and the other side I've got the retaining wall. And so there's only one area for those roots to expand and go out in my yard where the lawn is. And I'm having some troubles with that tree. One of the spines of the tree is having some problems. So, find the right place, find the right spot. Give it some room.
Doesn't get any easier than that, let me tell you.
What else about the soil side of things? I mean, you mentioned the compost and working that into everything else.
Well, any organic material. I mean, everybody talks about cow manure and composted cow. First of all, never fresh, but composted cow manure. It doesn't have a lot of power in it, but it's what it does have. Like I think it's like 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. It's you're not adding it for fertilizer. You're adding it to add the texture, you're adding it to add the microbes and the things that make your soil come back alive. And it's really not a lot. It's like stopping one thing and just starting to add some other things. And the soil, it wants to come back. It'll come back. Doesn't need a whole lot of additives. It just needs a rest from what we've been doing.
Simple as that.
It is pretty simple.
Too much chemistry.
Too much chemistry. Better living through chemistry used to be our motto, remember?
Well, I think we were...
oh, no, that was something else. Never mind.
Find it, Child of the 60s. On display right here. Bobby, we want to know, some of the podcast listeners here might not know about your background, so I'd like to dig into that and the background of Grow with Care as well.
Good.
But let's talk
so
about
not my real New Jersey background. We can start after.
Yeah, I'd like a little bit about the New Jersey background.
My formal education, I'm by trade a shop teacher.
Okay.
Got involved in a buddy of mine's father-in-law's fruit and vegetable stand, a real roll down the sides fruit and vegetable stand. Started selling some plants in 1976, put up our first garden center. And like I tell people, well, what'd you know? I read every label. I read every tag.
Sure.
If I unloaded a truckload of tomatoes, I would read the tag. Shockingly, what good information is on those tags that people take out and just throw away. You know, it would say like Champion tomato, one of the earliest tomatoes, grows in 55 days. And then somebody'd walk in and say, I'm looking for an early tomato. And
I got
boom,
one right
I was
here.
a genius. So, I mean, in the very beginning, that's how I learned. I read every single bottle, every bag, every plant label that I did in the beginning. And then, then it just evolved. Sold my garden centers, came to Minnesota, chose Minnesota to come to.
Nice.
And yeah, no regrets. That's 25 years ago. And then ever since then, I've had garden center. I've had my own. I worked at Lindale when I first came here. God rest its soul. And, after that, I've been involved with landscaping. I had a boulder company. I've been in this industry for 40 years now.
Sure.
As you smile over there, Bob, it's a great industry. The people are nice. The clientele is nice. It's that earthy connection, I think, that we all have. So I've done just about everything, and I've read and became more learned as I went down the line. But it's all been, school of hard knocks, so it's been a good school, though.
And how long has it been going on with you and Belinda Jensen on Grow with Care?
This is our 20th year.
I thought it was
That's
20.
Our 20 year this year's. We're both at the station about 21, 22 years. I mean, as you know, it's not my full-time job.
Yep.
And they put us together one Christmas and said, I was actually doing another show with Pat Evans and Kim Inslee. And they said, go get that guy and go do something. And it worked. We clicked. And then it was go get that guy and do something 8 weeks, 6 weeks. And then somebody sold Grow with Care. And we've been doing that for 20 years, 52 weeks a year.
That's just great.
It's pretty something to be proud of,
Absolutely.
A little segment like that for 20 years and still have people watching it and liking us.
When it all started out, was Belinda as much of a gardener then?
No, she knew nothing.
Okay, so there was a lot of education for her then. That's cool.
In the beginning, she always wanted to be Joe Gardner, and she still does to some extent, except for the fact that she knows a lot more now. But in the old days, she would want to be Joe. She would want to ask the questions that the viewer would be asking. And she still reels me back in sometimes and says, wait a minute, you got to explain that. But now I would venture to say 70, 80% of the questions that I get, she probably knows the answer to now.
That's cool.
And also, as you know, Bob, it's cyclic industry. I mean, the stuff that starts in May almost every year, and it is cyclic, so it's not like
you retain that information. You can bring it back again.
Even an old dog like me, eventually I remember it. You know what I mean? That kind of deal. But that was the beauty of it. And I don't know. We go out every couple of weeks and we film a couple of them, and we've got our pretty routine down, and we're best buds. I mean, it's
and Saturday mornings too. Then
and then we're there every Saturday morning live.
Yeah.
A
little bit different vibe on the live show on Saturday then.
Well, we go over, they show the package, and then we're live, and we chit-chat and fool around. And
take some calls.
Mm-hmm. Well, no more calls.
No more calls?
No, it's all social media now.
Okay, I suppose.
Go to the Facebook page.
Yeah.
I would love to take a call once in a while and just talk to someone alive.
Yeah, that interaction.
Yeah, that's what I like when I give my talks, when I get, almost every weekend since January, I've been somewhere giving a talk. And it's so nice when the people are there. And because with your customers, that for all these years, they're just nice people.
It's a people business.
It is
That's what people don't
business.
realize. It's just relational.
They love what they're doing. They wouldn't be. I mean, even when I had my garden centers, I would tell the guys or the gals that work for me, no matter what happened to you the night before, this is their hobby. They're coming here because they enjoy this. So if you're in a bad mood or something, go sit in the back until you can smile. But I'm telling you what, this is their hobby. They're coming here because it's not a necessity.
Yep.
You do not have to plant the garden. You do not have to mow your lawn. But the people that are coming here, the people that we're lucky enough to have as clients, this is what they love. This is what they enjoy. So it's a whole nother thing than being a food store or, clothing store or something like that.
Absolutely.
It's a great industry. Great industry.
And the feedback that you get from the viewers on Grow with Care is just remarkable as well. People really dig those segments.
We're very lucky, and then sometimes we get into, but we did roses. well, we've did almost everything you could do about roses in 20 years. But there are always new people coming in. There are always people willing to learn or want to know something new, to do new. So we have that issue where we have to say, yeah, that's okay to do tomatoes again, because tomatoes are tomatoes. It's all right. Maybe we'll talk a little differently, or we'll find something that's a little unique, but still, there's no reason not to talk about it just because
Of course.
we felt like we did
Yeah,
it.
it's like saying, well, here comes Christmas again. Do I have to
Very
put
good.
up a tree?
Right, very good analogy.
Yeah.
Right.
Lights
know,
again.
It's
Right.
it's ritual, it's cyclic,
It is.
it's reinforcing, and it's gratifying.
Yeah.
So those are all things that are important to people.
We're halfway through today's edition of the Landscape and Garden Show with Bob Harvey and yours truly, BT Brian Turner. Our guest is Bobby Jensen from Grow with Care on Care 11. When I said the Landscape and Garden Show with Bob and BT, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we're still fishing for, something that may be a more playful name than that very spelled out Landscape and Garden Show with Bob and B. So if you've got any suggestions, info@edelweissdesigns.com, or you can reach me at btvoice, BEETEA voice at gmail.com. Send them along. We always get and appreciate your feedback through the email and through the Twitter handles as well.
Is there prizes involved?
There may be.
Oh, okay.
There-
I
I
just
think
want to
there
know.
could be an
Yeah.
incentive.
There could be. There should be a
Absolutely.
prize.
I'm not quite sure yet. A six-pack of something,
So-
maybe.
right, exactly.
I
Okay,
mean, we
'cause
got to work something out.
budgetary constraints.
Of course,
Right.
yeah, which is, next to nothing, but that's okay. We'll figure something out. We've got friends in high places.
There you go.
Yes, we do. At this point in the show, I'd like to have you both ping each other here back and forth, a little ping pong match on new trends that are going on sort of right now, spring of 2015. Bobby Jensen, our guest today, you're going to begin with some of the latest in trending things that are happening from your perspective in the landscape and garden world.
Well, I mean, one that I've liked that it's growers' trends that they're actually now, after all these years, growing plants that will grow in the size of a backyard. Like Bailey's. I was at the Hort Society's Spring Fling, and Bailey does they call it a runway kind of deal, but they show their new plants. And they've got a lot of trees. They got apple trees that are 2.5 feet wide. They've got maple trees that are different than the old skinny columnar maple trees that do much better. So they're actually thinking about, and I think it has a lot to do with stuff going back into the cities. I mean, and smaller spaces. People aren't landscaping 10
Huge
acres
acreage,
anymore.
yeah. Yeah, okay.
They're landscaping around their living quarters. So I really think that's a big trend now, finally, that you've got plants that will fit into your design.
How about you, Bob? What do you see as some of the new trends that are going on from your perspective out there in more of the landscape world?
Well, the idea that the landscape gives back something, people used to separate out landscape as something that's visually attractive, like flowering things and maybe to have some texture and that kind of thing. And that the vegetable garden or the fruit garden or whatever was over there, and we had to hide it behind a fence because, it wasn't attractive.
Right.
And so now the idea that all these things weave together, and we just have to look to some of our European neighbors to see historically how, and even biblically, all the way back, how all this stuff was meant to be together. It works in tandem with each other and in harmony. And so coming up design-wise with the way to aesthetically and sensory, smell, taste, consumption, all those things is really the exciting part in the design world. And even down to a container, when you're doing a spring container, like one example right now, you do the pussy willows and maybe some, we'll throw some perennials in like heucheras and heucherellas and things like that, and then we'll move those perennials into the landscape as the season progresses. But we'll also throw in the cool weather crops. So we throw in Swiss chard and ornamental kales and regular kale, lettuces, the burgundy lettuces and
Yep.
radish, beets, the foliage of the beets is absolutely stunning. It's the deepest burgundy garnet.
Those beautiful
red.
leaves.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things are really fun. And people stop and take note. And then your flowers are just basically almost like an accent. So you do the same thing in the landscape where maybe you could have a clematis or a rose climbing up a east or southeast facing wall, but you could also do an espalier of one of the fruit trees, like a plum or an apple, a dwarf apple or cherry, and then you get this ritual thing coming back in, and it's really quite attractive. Also, in the perennial beds, incorporating some of the edibles, if only for just texture. You don't necessarily have to consume, but we use things like alpine strawberries, or if you have an area where you want to use a really large ground cover, go ahead and plant traditional strawberry varieties. There's a introduction from Bailey called the honeyberry, which I'm very excited about using in our landscape because it's a very attractive shrub. It connotes a lot of the characteristics, both taste and color-wise and stuff, to a blueberry, which are difficult at best for us to cultivate here.
Sure.
I mean, it can be done, but you're doing a lot of things. You're combating a lot of regular things. Our pH in our soil tends to run much higher. Blueberries like lower pH. And extremely well-drained soil, but good moisture supply, a lot of. And then the honeyberry just has a lot to offer without as much intense maintenance.
Without as much of the mitigating circumstances
It's
there.
actually
Yeah.
potable too.
Yes.
They're saying it. You can try it in a container.
Yes. Yes, and the idea of edible containers where you can put things in the containers, like I said earlier, but you could do strawberries and the honeyberry and those, because people want, especially in small spaces, we're looking for maximizing the application of each plant, how it functions in the space. How many things can it offer? Can it offer 4 seasons of color? Can it offer texture? Can it offer good disease resistance, so you don't have to use chemicals? Can it offer food production? Those kinds of things.
And if you cut it back, will it grow back? You know,
Probably.
get the chives cut back and watch them grow. Yeah, get the
Pick
leaf
your
lettuce
lettuce.
cut back.
Pick your leaf lettuce.
Watch it grow back again. Yeah, yeah. We mentioned bees a little bit earlier, out of context with the show, but now let's dial in on bees since we've got 3 bees in the room right now.
There you go.
How about that? Let's go with that. That's been a big thing for you, I know, Bobby, and also Bob, with clients that are out there in the landscape world. Are they worried about the bee situation? Do you hear that from clients?
Yes, we even have clients ask what kind of plants and where are we sourcing them from in terms of their application in the
Sure.
landscape, that they're not chemically treated with what they're making some links now between
The neonics and
Yeah,
things like that.
yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good because a lot of our local growers, at least the ones that I work with, are very conscientious about those kinds of things. And so it's a good boon to their business, for small businesses, to be able to support them. And, the price point, if it's higher, it's so negligible because you're getting the right fit. So
Now, Bobby Jensen, I know you've dialed in on more than several occasions with the folks at the U of M. Give us some insight into some of the conversations you've had and what they're up to.
They're doing some amazing things up there, from studying the CCD, the colony collapse, to getting people to actually this. Well, here's one. What was it? 3 years ago, they had 70 people apply or 60 people apply for their B class. Now they have over 750 and a waiting list.
That's amazing.
People are thinking about it. Now there's, I think one of the things that the misconception is that all bees don't sting and most bees are docile. I mean, you really have to go out of your way to get a bee to sting you. It's not just going to look to sting you. They're going to go away. The native bees, they're singular bees. They don't hive. They're usually in the ground or
Okay.
in, you can build little houses out of straw for them and things like that. They're totally done. You'd have to squeeze one. And they actually do pollinate. They visit more flowers. They don't go as far, but they visit more flowers than a bumblebee or a honeybee.
Do we see the native bees as much as we see the other kind? I mean, or
Yeah,
what?
you would if you knew what to look for.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
You would
Yeah.
if
So
you knew what
what
to
is
look
the
for.
difference? And how do they look?
Well,
They
a
got to be
bumblebee-
similar. I know bumblebees, the big guys.
Well, that's
yeah.
what everybody thinks a bee looks like. Some of these are like fluorescent green.
Okay.
Some of them are so small. I was blown away when she showed us the the tablet they had of them. They were little tiny, and they were bees. But most of them have the hairy. They have to have the hairiness of them, and they don't look like a traditional bee most of the time. But they're pretty amazing things. They pollinate. We're not going to plant our way out of this. There's just no way. I mean, luckily, like Bob said, I think in the cities, bees do better now than in the country because of the insecticides and how they're applying them and things like that. So, having a beehive in the city seems to work well because there's a diversity of flowers. Let's be realistic. A lot of our problems are coming from monoculture. Take a ride 20 miles outside of Minneapolis and you see nothing but corn
And soybean or
soybeans.
whatever the case
so
may
it's
be.
one plant that doesn't even need a bee. So we've taken away most of that. That's it all goes back to that habitat thing where maybe this 50 feet of before a river where they're going to leave it go natural, maybe it's going to help. Look at dandelions. We wipe out the first bee food, dandelions, and we wipe them out because for some reason we don't like them. I think they're kind of nice in a lawn. They don't. They're nice, pretty flower. But
There's-
things like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's places in Canada where the dandelions, as I understand, are so big they're like zinnias.
Ooh,
They're absolutely stunning, and they let fields of them just grow dense, and it's absolutely
it's got
stunning.
to be gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's gotta be
but
good.
it is a pretty plant.
we
That's
have
the funny
some-
part, and
we-
you can eat the leaves too. So
We have some preconceived notions of these things that have been built up over the years, and whether or not they make any sense, just like Creeping Charlie. When I started with Creeping Charlie in my garden center, it was ground ivy. It grows in the shade, it flowers, and it spreads. I don't know what's wrong with that. I mean, it's a lot of good things, but
if it's in your lawn,
we
that's
don't
a
like
different.
Creeping
Yeah, that's
Charlie.
right.
We
You got to
don't
get
like
rid of
Creeping
that.
Charlie. But again, another monoculture, lawn. Think about it. You get clover in your lawn, you kill the clover out of your lawn instead of leaving it flower. Clover is a great seed. You can walk on it, stomp on it, and it continues to grow, and it's green. So, you mentioned Europe. We have a lawn culture in the United States. Don't know how, don't know why, but lawns are important. In Europe, it's gardens. In Europe, they have gardens. They have some really bizarrely wonderful, well-kept gardens, but everybody's got a garden. Everybody's got vegetable. Everybody's got flowers. Everybody has gardens where we take that same land and we plant grass.
Do you feel torn sometimes because you are called upon for advice on the quote unquote lawn, the American lawn that we're talking about, but now you've just said some of those plants, the Creeping Charlie and the clover and the dandelion, you love those plants.
Yeah, I don't feel torn. I give
Okay.
them my honest opinion,
Yep.
and if you want to just have I make no judgments.
Yep.
Shocking as that might be, I make no judgments. If that's I tell people when I speak, if you want to use chemicals, as long as I'm telling you what it does and what your options are, that's your decision. For years we all used them. I sold them. I leaned up against when you came for a garden, and said 10-10-10. That's the perfect garden food.
Here we go.
No one can dispute that, except it may not be what you need. Like you said, Bob, when we were talking a few minutes ago, soil testing. Now, how do you buy stuff when you don't know what you got? If you don't know what's in your soil, and you made a great point, it's not your lawn, it's your lawn, it's your vegetable garden, it's your regular garden, it's what each area really does need to know what those three magic numbers, NPK. They're there for a reason. Each one does something different. So, I think you said it. Without a doubt, the most important thing to do is to test your soil. So when you go in a store, you're buying, then you're not being sold to.
Yep.
36 points of nitrogen. Well, 36 points of nitrogen. Grow like a bugger, wouldn't it? And you'd be out there mowing.
We're on episode 5 of the Landscape and Garden Show here, and I think almost to a fault, every show that topic has come up is
gotta
soil
come up.
testing. Yeah,
It's gotta come up.
That's been a mantra for Bob Harvey there. Every show we've brought it up, and I'm glad you did today.
It's one of the most important things. One of the easiest and most important things you can do.
Right. And excuse me, another reason why you want to have your soil tested, if a lot of the projects we work with are new construction. So we have what we call disturbed soils, and we don't know. There's a lot of mystery in what's left after construction and what areas need to be abated in terms of soil amendment. If there's contaminated soils need to be removed, or everything you get construction debris, you get all kinds of stuff in there, and you don't want to find out later on that the tree you planted just isn't going to survive in that. That's another reason for getting to know what soils you're dealing with in the construction.
It's not hard to find out about your soils.
No.
As you said. I mean, send it to the U. Was it $15?
Yeah, small charge.
Very
send it
small
to
you. Buy
upcharge.
one of those little $2.99, shake them up, and at least you're doing the color match. You're attempting, you know?
At least a little something. Yeah.
You get more knowledge.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely. What do you think is the most busy thing that people can do with their lawn right now, Bobby? I mean, where should we be right now, end of April?
As long as it's dry, which is the biggest thing out there, stay out of your garden, stay out of everything if it's wet. But I think now you probably can rake and fertilize.
Okay.
But not treat for pre-emergence crabgrass. And also, if you don't have crabgrass, there's no reason to pre-treat for crabgrass if you have. And the best defense against crabgrass is a good thick lawn.
Is the fertilizing and the health of the
sometimes
health of
you
the
need
lawn.
to give up that year of crabgrass and just make your lawn better and thicker because 90% or probably more of the crabgrass preventers sold you can't seed with. So, you fight against that. But right now, I think it's okay to probably rake. Aeration over dethatching. We talked about that. Dethatching to me hurts more than it does good. Yeah, you see brown ground and you have a pile of dead thatch, but you've wrecked crowns and you've injured the grass. Dethatching does the same thing. I mean, dethatching.
Aeration
does the same thing. But you want to, you don't want to wear the golf spikes and walk around because that just spreads it. You want to actually do plug aeration, pull it out. Those plugs break down the microbes in that eat the thatch.
Yeah. At first they look like goose poops. But
Exactly
you know what?
the way
You
I
can
describe
handle it
And
And
lots of them.
And in a week or two, they're gone. But they're working their way. They're working their magic. They're eating the thatch. They're opening up the soil for more air and nutrients and oxygen and water to get down in the soil. It's probably the best thing you can do. Now, Belinda and I's argument always is when should you do it?
Okay.
She has been told that you should do it in the fall and not the spring. I think you should do it if you haven't done it. I think you should do it as soon as you possibly can do it.
Just do it.
I would agree with that.
Right.
Yeah.
The theory is that you do it in the spring, you're going to get weeds. I don't know if I believe that. But if you haven't, I would do it spring and fall for a couple of years, and then whenever one.
Because the goal is in a healthy lawn is getting it to a point that it's optimizing the health of the grass itself.
Right.
So if you create an environment where the grass can grow and expand, then naturally a lot of the weeds are going to be kept at bay.
Sure.
So let's talk about what promotes root growth. So when we talk about the aeration and so forth, we're allowing oxygen to get into those roots. Water goes down those little holes. Also,
Any fertilizer you might lay down there is going to make its way down too.
And then also top dressing. I think that's one thing that gets overlooked. I mean, the grass is expounding so much energy, expelling energy out of the soil that puts some of that organic
Put a
matter
half
back
inch.
on the half inch.
Half inch. That's all you got to do.
And if you want to top dress with a little seed, there's enough there for the seed to grab. And then
Right.
keep the moisture at the appropriate level for the germination. And you're gonna crowd out the bad guys.
That's the idea. Well, weeds, hot and dry. Grasses, cool and moist.
Yep.
They don't live in the same area. So if you've got a good thick lawn that's really healthy, you're not going to have weeds. Weeds, where do they come? Well, you got a dry, big, empty spot. Weeds will grow. One other thing though that I think is excellent, going to the same vein as why are you doing what you're doing, is watering.
I was just going to say the same
Right.
thing. Are you willing to make the commitment?
To put the right amount of water
Right.
down. I mean, the rule of thumb, as always, is an inch a week. So how do you know with what you got, you're getting an inch a week?
Yeah, how do you know?
Well, there's only one way. You put rain gauges, tuna cans, you mark a half an inch in it. Twice a week you want to do it. You put them all over your lawn. You turn your sprinkler system on, you get a beer or adult beverage. You
Beer
sit
sounds
there
good. Yeah.
and you time it. And when you have a half an inch of water in there, that's how long you water it. I can't
And
tell
like you said, twice a week. then.
twice a week. If
Yeah.
you got to do it 3 times a week because it's sandy or it's the middle of the summer, that's okay. But the reason you do that, like Bob was saying, is so the roots, if you water lightly, where are the roots going to stay? Where it's moist.
Yeah.
Right on top. So it gets dry. It gets, windy. They're going to dry out. But if you water deeply, the roots follow it down. They're cooler. They're down there protected from the hot, and your grass is going to function better. It's going to grow better, like you said. And the other thing I think with grass is we scalp our grass. We cut too low. Should be 3.5 inches, 4 inches high. It's lusher. It shades its root system, conserves water again. And
its own microenvironment.
it is. It is.
Keeps the weeds at bay.
It does keep them because it's shading again. It's the
Yeah.
sun isn't getting to the soil, and if the sun doesn't get to the soil, probably 80% of the weeds are.
If you're not gonna golf on it, just let it
There's
grow.
no
a
reason.
little
Let it
longer.
grow. Let it grow a little higher.
Yeah.
It's not a putting green.
And wouldn't you want to have a little grass between your toes when you're out there running around?
And then the other thing that horticulturally happens, if you scalp grass, what's it going to do? What do leaves do? They make food. It's going to grow leaves instead of growing root system. If you cut it at the right height, the leaves and the root system will grow in proportion the way it's supposed to. We cut our grasses way too short consistently.
Now, obviously, this is the time of year when we're getting the mowers out and ready to be
Yeah.
out. So let's chat about that for a quick second. Blade sharpness, how important is that?
Probably the most important thing besides yanking on a string to get it started.
Wow.
I mean, if it's not sharp, you tear the grass.
Okay.
You'll get, if you look at grass that's with a blade that's dull, it's just ripped up on the top. But if you look at a cut, they're alive. Let's be realistic. It's a living thing. If you rip it apart, it's not going to perform as well as if it gets done properly.
How do you know when the blade is dull? How do you feel it? How many mows do you get out of a blade before you sharpen
I think
it?
during the summer, we don't have a long mowing season. Every 6 weeks or so, I would sharpen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was, when I ran the big maintenance company, every week we sharpened our blades. Now, those mowers are running a lot more than that, but every week the blades got sharpened. That was one guy's job, blade sharpen every week. So I think 4 to 6 weeks for the summer for the $7 or whatever it costs, or you can sharpen your own blades if you want. I mean, you can buy something to do that, but at least 2 to 3 times a year I would sharpen. Once in the beginning and a couple more times in the season.
It'll be more efficient for the mower too, in terms of
Sure.
fuel.
Yep.
Just better on the engine and everything. What kind of tools can you use to sharpen those blades?
It's like a soapstone kind of
Okay,
thing that we
yeah.
use for things like Felcos and pruners and things like that. And I just leave it to the pros. The hardware store, good
Boom.
reason to go
And that's
down.
what you were talking about, Bobby, like $7. Just take
Yeah.
that blade off, take it in. Mhm.
Almost every hardware store probably sharpens blades.
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Get a tune-up and sharpen your blades.
Yeah, get it all ready to rock and roll. Gentlemen, we have like 7 minutes left on this hour-long show. I mean, the time has passed by quickly.
I don't want to leave.
You can stay.
Can I stay
You
more?
can stay.
All right.
But I want to throw it out there. I mean, with 7 minutes left, what direction do you think we should go in, Bob Harvey?
Well, we could talk a little about what's blooming.
Yeah,
There it
we
is.
usually do that at the beginning of the show.
Yes,
So
well,
let's.
we had a lot to get into. So we're starting to see more color in terms of the Prunus family is what I think. Any variety in the cherry plum category, which would be my North Star cherry in my backyard, started opening 2 days ago. Beautiful white to a light pink blush flower, which means it's self-pollinating. We're going to have cherries on it. Come,
Nice.
end of
Sour
June.
cherries.
Sour pie
Sour
cherries,
pie
the
cherries.
best kind. And then
Bob Harvey's love for cherries is
Yes,
expressed
yes, it's-
much like the soil
just every
testing thing.
podcast.
It's like every show.
just
Yeah,
every
yeah.
show.
It's all
do you-
good.
While we're at it.
So
while
do
we're
you,
at it.
do you vacation up in?
Traverse City?
Yes.
I've been there many times. And I have a secret place I go to very close to home here to pick. And it's an
we won't-
hour's drive from here.
All right, narrows
1
it down.
hour.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe we'll tell you on one of the
East,
shows
west,
coming
which
up. As,
north,
Yeah, well,
oh, that's to be yet disclosed in the future. But So the cherries, the sand cherry, Prunus tomentosa, which is the Nanking cherry, absolutely gorgeous right
Beautiful
now.
flower.
Magnolias are finishing up, except we have one next door that is it's called the Yellow Butterflies, which is a little later blooming magnolia that has a beautiful creamy yellow tulip-shaped flower that will
Okay.
be coming out, and those grow quite large. So after the first show of our stellata magnolias, this one comes a little bit later. And then
The early spring flowering bulbs are all popping now.
we have the early tulips, which would
Cilia.
be the Darwins and the Scillas and the few hyacinths starting to pop, the more traditional smelly big ones. But the Scilla and the Scillas,
The Craig
almost-
eyes, all of the
Yeah.
early, the shorter
the Grega
tulips
tulips, yep.
are the ones. But you're getting,
Yep.
you know, I've actually seen some daffodils starting to come up. And,
Yep.
You know, it depends
Depending on
north,
the
south.
location.
Right, north,
Yep.
south, depends on where it is.
Yep.
But, you know, this is a great time of year, rebirth.
Yep. The other thing is back to the Prunus family. There's a double flowering almond. It's called, which is a shrub that's very rare. I mean, you can find it, and
It's not used. It's
double,
not rare. It's not
yeah,
used.
Yeah, it's not used. Underplanted.
Okay.
Right.
But again, location. Double flowering, very full pink flowers. And it also can come on a standard as what they call double flowering plum. That is absolutely stunning. So the next thing will be the crabapple blossoms are starting to swell, and we'll start to see a little bit of color from those. And the red buds, Cercis canadensis.
I was waiting, man.
Yep. The ones in my yard and some that we were installing today, the color is there. The little pea-shaped flower hasn't opened yet. And the unique thing about this particular spring blooming shrub or small tree is that the flowers come before any leaves.
Right.
So you get to really appreciate this really unique,
Coming out of those
artistic,
branches,
delicate
yeah.
It is the
display.
best woodsy flower tree.
Mm-hmm.
You go in the woods, down the Arboretum at this time of year, and all of a sudden you see that color.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. And there's no green. There's nothing. There's just that color in the woods. That's I was waiting.
Yeah,
'cause that's
we were
my,
waiting on that
that's
one.
my favorite spring
Yes.
one, man.
Well, and the other thing is you want to make sure you get the northern
Northern
strain
grown, right,
that was
right.
developed
Northern
right
strain.
there at the Arboretum. So that's
but it is a beautiful. It is my favorite spring flowering shrub tree.
Props to the Arboretum too, because they've brought us so many of those kind of strains.
Props to the Arboretum or the whole Minnesota. You know,
And then our rhododendrons are
Yeah.
probably, this is going to be their best week, I think, for the next 5 to 7 days. The PJM is probably the most common, and then there's other varieties
Purple
that
gem.
are the purple gem, a little more dwarf, and then the rest of the azalea family, which the PJMs now fall under. Those come a little bit later, but they're getting ready to swell, start swelling, and
again,
produce
another
as well.
Minnesota deal, the Northern Lights series.
The Northern
All
Lights.
day, you know, it used to be
fabulous.
orange and yellow, and now
Do you have a
we've got
favorite in that series? I
probably
do.
Rosy Glow.
Rosy Glow is very good. I like Northern Highlights.
Oh, that's a pretty one.
And the reason why I like Northern Highlights, I like Rosy Glow and I'll interplant, is it has great fall color reliably.
Yeah.
And it gets up to about, I've seen them 7-8 feet tall.
Wow.
And
And,
that's
And
what's the
fragrant.
reliable fall color that you get then? Just
It's
this
kind
whole.
of a burnt
Crimson,
burgundy and
right.
orange and crimson and yeah.
So you get a lot of nice seasonality out of that
Yeah.
plant.
Well, that's the other thing. When you put it in the ground, think about what it's going to do in the fall.
And
Because
think
that's another
about
season.
where you're putting the whole rhododendron azalea family has certain soil requirements. So you want to know what to do before you go planting them because they have to have. I find it's so interesting. If you drive down a north-south street right now, I did this today, that all the houses, the fronts of houses that were facing east, the number of rhododendrons were phenomenal. There were none on the west side of the houses facing west because they just don't do as well with the
Right.
west facing
Sure,
sun.
okay.
But they like that location of the early daylight.
morning sun,
And there's
yep.
a little bit more moisture, and if they're planted properly in the right conditions, they will produce unbelievable. So
We're right in the middle of things starting to explode.
Mm-hmm.
It's days away from full blast, flower, color, everything. It's It's getting there. And one last thing, what are you thinking about impatiens this year, Bob? What's your
I haven't
thought?
heard the latest update. I haven't heard a lot of vote of confidence from the growers.
Well,
but
it's
And
here.
wherein lay your question there, Bobby?
There's the powdery mildew of impatiens
Okay.
is spreading.
Okay.
It started on the East Coast. It's here now. What it'll look like if you've had it looks like you're not doing a good job with your impatiens. Looks like you haven't watered it. The leaves turn yellow and mottled and fall off, and it gets kind of stringy. But once you have it in your soil, you have it. And there are people that are not planting. There are growers that are not growing. You will get a clean one from your grower. I mean, they can use the right chemicals. But after that, unless you want to spend a ludicrous amount of money, that's
Like you said, if it's in your
the
soil,
ground,
it's there.
or it's
Okay.
in the air.
Okay.
It's a spore.
it's airborne.
All right.
It's airborne, so it's in the air. So, when we were talking before about, different trends, I think you got to start thinking about what do I put. Nothing better, number one flower in the world, for the bang for the buck in the shade. But what are you going to do? And I think you said some great things with the leafy vegetables and the leafy plants that'll grow in the shade.
Texture.
Yeah.
Texture's a big deal now. Texture's a lot bigger. Plus, it's easier than growing flowers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some alternatives there.
Yeah.
Texture and color. We have a whole series of plants that grow in the shade, either the flower color or the leaf color.
Right.
Is that beautiful golden line color. So when we do our designs, we're working at making as much contrast that pops in the shade.
Sure.
Otherwise we rely just on an annual to give, and you don't have to rely on
Right, and
several
using the
flats of-
light colors, you draw that, you draw the shade. It
Yeah.
comes forward.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. But I think there's going to be an issue.
All right. Well,
Whether or not you do it, it's up to the people. I know growers, some are going to have them, some aren't. But I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
all right. So we'll keep an eye on that and ask your gardener about it when you're buying your plants and
There
see
you
what
go.
they have to say.
Ask those
One
questions.
good substitute, and we'll talk more about annuals later on, is that we can look at some of the begonia family that seems a little more resistant to the mildew
Okay.
than the.
Well,
And a great plant to put in the ground, too.
and also
Yeah.
New Guinea impatiens isn't from the same family,
Right.
but expensive
Yep.
and doesn't grow the same. You get
High
flower.
water requirements.
Yeah,
High water
big time.
requirements.
Huge,
All right.
huge.
Bobby, what a pleasure to have you on the show,
Oh,
my
man,
friend.
thank you. I had a blast.
Thank you
It was great to see you
for coming.
again, Bob.
See the Grow with Care segments with Bobby Jensen and Belinda Jensen on Care 11. And there's Bob Harvey, and I'm BT. Thanks for joining in on the Landscape and Garden Show here on the Alive and Social Network. We'll see you next week.
Bye.